Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Rostermania, where we try and figure out the hypothetical best teams and what teams we might see in the upcoming OWCS. Today we're going to be looking at the Korean region because the roster lock's actually on the 16th of February, which is really soon. So we'll do another video after the roster lock and look at the actual rosters that have been made and exist. But I thought I'd do one before all of that so we can still sort of theory craft what makes the most sense for teams to do, what options are available. Because Korea as a region, as it has been the entire time Overwatch has existed, has the most talent. Maybe not the peak in every hero, but in terms of depth of talent, they blow every other region out of the water, and they're probably actually the ones who are going to suffer the most because there's so much talent, so few spots, and so few orgs to support these players and these spots. Lots of these players are going to end up playing either just on teams with their friends without an org support, or sort of be forced into retirement. So I think it's a really interesting region because of the talent that's available there, but also it's a really volatile region because of how limited a lot of the spots and the opportunities are. So let's take a look at the spreadsheet. The first thing that might jump out to you is that this section here of viable options or people worth considering is very big. It's very big. We can look at established teams, and there's actually only really one established team here in terms of we have an org and we've announced, and that's the Falcons team, which is as a super team. This is really the team that every team in the world is going to look at and say this team's going to be really hard to beat. They've got a really complete roster in terms of Smurf and Hanbin. What can't they play? Not just what can't they play, what can't they be the best in the world at? Really, really limited. Proper and Stalker are also obviously massively talented. You have to imagine Proper's probably going to feel a lot more of the hit scan type responsibilities. But as we saw in Season 5 when he played Sojin, he can do it. Fielder and Chio, what can you say? They're great. Majid comes in as the sort of vigilante type player for this backline now. I think it's an interesting one. Obviously, he sort of sticks out a little bit like a sore thumb in this roster. I think Majid is a good player. I think his hero pool does suit in his second flex support role. But we did see on Atlanta last season that actually Chew and Fielder don't have all that much interest in letting the extra flex support play. Vigilante got so little game time in Atlanta, wouldn't it be different from Majid? I mean, maybe it's a chance this sort of core of players have actually learned from the problems they had in Atlanta last year and want to expand and diversify the pool of comps they can play. The implication is certainly that by signing someone like Smurf and Hanbin over someone like a Donghack or a Fearless, is they seem to be prioritizing hero pool and ability to play other comps. And that maybe actually in some ways opens a door for Majid, but the proof will be in the pudding, right? And until I see it, I'm really hesitant to say how much we can expect to see Majid play in this core of players. Outside of this core, we really don't have a lot of announced orgs. Obviously, Runaway have just announced their return. So now it'll be super interesting to see where Runaway go. There's a few teams that have sort of advertised as we're an established core, come pick us up. Maybe the most prominent of such is from Gamer. There is no E in it, I don't know why. It's not a typo on my part, they've just chosen not to have an E in it, but it's fine. But this seems really interesting. It's actually gotten quite a bit of criticism. I think a lot of people obviously are very keen on Violet now for you, but some criticism as to why Finn is playing on this roster. Why couldn't Violet have done better? Should this not be Shu or Vigilante or somebody like that? And I think, if you say, shouldn't a flex support be Shu? You can actually say that to any flex support in the world at any point in time. Wouldn't this be better if it was Shu? I can probably even make an argument for Falcons to a degree of, wouldn't it be better if it was Shu? Shu's really good, guys. He's probably the best in the world. Super high talent level. So you can make an argument Shu should be on every roster ever made, ever. But I think Finn is actually a really good player. I think when he came into the league in Season 5, but especially now Lucio Animetra at the start, he was unbelievable. Everyone was like, this guy's one of the best flex supports. He's really got a long way to go. I think obviously he had a bad season in Season 6. No denying that. But I think every player on Shock had a bad season on Season 6. And I think also, all of those players, Jumbin, Max, Hisang, they are all way better players than they showed on that season. And I think we saw a glimpse of that when we saw Hisang play on Vancouver Titans and do really well. If your team atmosphere is rubbish, if everyone's in a bad mood and it's just a depressing, unmotivated, unconfident atmosphere, everyone's going to play bad. Everyone's going to look a way worse player than they are. So I think Finn, outside of that environment, will do really well. I think when we played Finn in scrims against South Korea at the World Cup, he looked really good. He looked like a top talent. So I think this is actually a really strong roster. There is a problem with the roster in the sense that, like, if you look at Finn, Violet, and Alpha, we've got 3 players here who are really, really top shelf chicken. And then when we got Flora, Belosria, and Bernard, these guys are, you'd still buy and eat these chicken, but they wouldn't be on the top shelf. They're not top of the range. And it does seem to be a sort of skill disparity between half the roster and the other. Obviously, one thing that should be said about all these rosters that are just we're a core of players looking to get picked up by an org. They might get picked up as a group, but it's also really easy just to take pieces from this. Like if an org comes in, like say Runaway, and they just say, well, we don't want the whole team. We just want Finn, Violet, and Alpha. Finn, Violet, and Alpha are probably going to say yes. They're going to take it, and then you can replace some of these people with maybe upgrades. Maybe you start putting like a Birdring in here or a Hisu in here or something above floor, or you start putting Fearless or Kellen in on tank or something. You can really upgrade this roster quite quickly, I think. And that's true of all these rosters that say, we're a group of players looking for an org. You can just pull them apart. If you're an org and you come in with money and finances, you can just pull them apart and take the pieces you want. And that's kind of just the reality of the situation. Team 815 actually were registered and did the sort of org announcement thing, and then have since not done that. So I don't actually know what the exact status is here, but I thought they're an interesting team because on paper they're maybe not the strongest team, but they've certainly done well in Flash Ops previously in Korea, and they're a team that kind of have that sort of greater than the sum of their parts. It should be said in that Flash Ops team, they actually had Develop play Flex support a lot and play Anna, and it was Decay who came... I can write it. It was Decay who came in and played, and obviously Decay's like a huge talent and will upgrade most rosters he's in. So I'm not surprised maybe that this roster sort of did fall off and sort of come apart, or at least appears to have come apart, and they've gone their separate ways. But I think this roster on paper, it looks okay, but I think there's obviously a lot more talent and a lot better ones you can do. This O2 core that I've put down here haven't actually announced anything or said anything as far as I'm aware. But they did. This is the roster they competed in Flash Ops with in Korea, and I think actually this O2 core is pretty keen to play with each other. They enjoy each other's company, so especially if there's no org support, or I wouldn't be surprised to see a version of this type of roster come in. And again, the same thing we said about Finn. I'm actually really interested to see Jumbin, Max, Heesang play without that weight and pressure and bad environment they had in Shock in Season 6 and see how well they can do. Because I think they can actually go really far. I think they can do a lot. Now, we get to the interesting bit where we have to try and take all of this and turn it into some teams. And there's so much to choose from. There's really so much to choose from. I think important things to consider are what existing rumours are now. So obviously Runaway have announced they're back, but we don't know in what form. Runaway and Runner obviously have a bit of a history of taking young talent and building it up. So will they keep doing that? Because if they do that, maybe a lot of these players don't quite fall into that category, or they want to take a couple of vets but introduce a load of new talented players as well and not just rely on the existing talent. Or do they just pick up a team because there's so much talent, they just want to pick up a team and they can do immediately well? There's also rumours that this Japanese org has got Shu and Lip signed, and they're potentially going to do similar to what Falcons have done and sign an all-Korean team and compete in the Korean region. Real possibilities. So if we sort of explore that idea for a second, and we take someone like Lip and we take Shu, it's a pretty good start as far as building a super team goes. I think Chorong probably becomes the obvious option here. Lee Jae Gong, I think, is actually really up there as well in terms of the elite category. But I think all of a sudden that starts to look like a backline that, you know, is it better than Theo and Childer? Probably not, just because Theo and Childer have this sort of this understanding from playing together for so long that is really hard to replicate without just spending a load of time learning and replicating it, or learning and improving as a duo. But in terms of raw talent, I think Chorong and Shu really up there. Likewise, I actually think when you look at Lip, obviously Proper and Stalker are better on a lot of heroes, and maybe Sojin, Lip v Proper. I think Lip's actually got the edge, and especially when we get to like the proper snipers. You know, if you were going to say there's a weakness of this Falcons roster, maybe if it was like a pure double sniper meta, Proper and Stalker might start to look a little bit weaker than others. Like an Overwatch, like, do you remember Overwatch League Season 1 where it was like double sniper Mercy? If that meta comes back, it might be a bit rough for them. It probably won't. Maybe clutching at straws a little bit there to find downfall of the Falcons. But Lip, especially on Sojin, I think, in terms of a hit scan, can compete. Then when we get here, I mean, ideally it would be Alpha Yi. It depends how much you believe he is committed to this org group. If you can't get Alpha Yi, you can probably get Pelican. And this is really fine as well, I think. In terms of just raw talent, you'd be in a pretty good spot. Then tank-wise, you could probably get Fearless. Obviously, when you sign Fearless, you're sort of signing up to a guy who has a limited hero pool. So you have to ask, does it match everyone else's hero pool? And it's like, well, actually, Alpha and Pelican will play Tracer Genji, and that could be fine. Either of them really fit. Obviously, Lip's going to be hit scan. Shu's going to play Ana, pretty good. Trong's going to play Brig or Kiri. It seems really fine for him. So actually, even if you do just sign a one trick, it's really fine. You could even if you wanted, you could even put Donghack on here, and you can make probably a lot of arguments about Donghack the same that we made about the shock players in terms of what if you just put this player in an environment that wasn't as oppressive and wasn't as difficult to perform in? Could he be really good? I mean, you could also argue that if you put Donghack on a roster like this, he's once again the youngest player, he's just going to get bullied again. So maybe we don't do that. But the theory's fair. I think the other person worth mentioning in this sort of tank, best other tank debate is Kellen. I think Kellen's much more well-rounded than Fearless. Not as good at Winston, obviously, but, you know, he's much more well-rounded. But then I think, actually, if you ask me, let's say we presume Alpha Yi is loyal as all heck to these boys, and we have to just ignore him. We go with this roster. Well, actually, if it was like, I'm in a classic Korean meta where it's Winston, Tracer, Sojourn, and a Brig. You go, well, is Fearless a better Winston than Smurf? Well, actually, yeah. Is Pelican a better Tracer than Stalker or Proper, whoever plays it? Probably not. Is Lip a better Sojourn than Proper or Stalker? Probably Proper, right? Maybe not. Maybe not, actually. Maybe Lip actually takes the edge there. Is Shu a better Ana than Fielder? Yeah. Trong a better Brig than Chio? Probably not. There's also an argument that even though Shu is a better Ana, that maybe the Theo Childer synergy and understanding and how well they play together when they do play an Ana Brig maybe actually puts them above this. But it's competitive, right? You're stuck. You kind of have to rely on it being that type of meta. But I think because of the amount of talent, you can build a roster that can compete at least in that meta. The problem you would then have if, say, it becomes a Junker Queen meta or a Diva meta or a Zarya meta, then suddenly you can't compete at all, right? Because all of a sudden Hanbin's going to insanely gap Fearless, or even if you had a more well-rounded one like Kellen or something here, he's going to gap him as well. And this is when his Falcons roster becomes really scary because it can pretty much do everything. But in terms of like a pure Winston one, I think you can actually make a team that can roughly compete. The other problem we have to talk about in Korea is only 3 Korean teams get through the first bit, 4 if you include the wild card, which will almost certainly be a Korean team. So top 4 get somewhere in Korea, whereas only top 2 get to the international and the major. So you actually have to be a top 2 Korean team to get there. So there's sort of different goals in mind. Like if Falcons have to be a top 2 team, if you build a version of this roster, it has to be a top 2 team. But then all this other talent still exists. This isn't even considering that this team might be okay, and this team might exist, and this O2 core might exist in some form. And even if all of this was true, let's say this team exists, the O2 core exists, Falcons obviously exists, and these teams exist, we can still build a really good team. We could still take maybe some of the younger players. We could take like a Donghack, or we could take a Zest and start to put him in here. I mean, we've not even mentioned Birdring yet, or Hisu. Like, these guys, Edison, surely these guys have a team, right? Maybe even, this is maybe a hot take, it's maybe going to upset some people, but I'm a bit of an Ezhan fan. I'm a bit of an Ez head, as they say. I could see him actually even be on some of these teams. Like, Skewed as well, surely he deserves a team. We've not even mentioned Vigilante. Actually, Vigilante has to be on these teams, right? Lee Jae-gong has to be on one of these teams. And when we start talking about 2 spots, it's so hard. It's so hard to really see. Because we can do the same again, and we can obviously if you want to put your Korean super team in chat of once the Falcons players have been taken out, you can make a pretty good case. Obviously, if an org support comes in, you can really start to see like certain people like Skewed become a really great option if you ever want like to do the old Glad system where you have 2 flex supports and 1 main support, and you can play all sort of combos of everything. If you want to sign 2 tanks, if you want to add like a max I think Max, Burner are both good, but they both have the same sort of problems where you probably actually need to pair them with like a Fearless or a Dong Hack. Maybe you have someone like Kellen, he can solo tank and do all the roles, but it's tricky. It's tricky, and there's so much talent. We've not even mentioned Twilight. How do you fit all these players onto teams? We've not even mentioned Ans. It's so hard to fit. We've not even mentioned Happy. We've not even mentioned all of this. So it's so hard to put all these teams, all these players onto teams. It's going to be really interesting how this actually falls and how many of these teams are org supported. I think the org support is super important because there's so much there, but it's so competitive to get those 2 spots. I think it has put Korea as a region in a really difficult spot. The other option for a lot of these players is to become an import player. Like we've seen with, I didn't even put him on the list because it was already sorted, but Checkmate has obviously gone. Izzy has gone. Obviously, Yaki and Prophet are crossed out because I think they now coach him. But suddenly it's like, well, actually should we import, right? And obviously Fearless has made it aware that he actually is available for an NA or an EU team. But we hit this problem where you either need to do like, if you want to import a Korean player, you really kind of have to do it properly. And when I say properly, I mean funded. So the way Rock have done it or Toronto have done it, where they're like, we're going to have Korean players, come on over here, you're going to be in the region you're playing on, you're going to compete on fair ping and all of this. Or you can do free imports, like maybe, you know, I was seeing like Kalios trialing for Timeless and stuff, where you're going to play on, say, a Korean player will play on an American team and American OWCS, but will just be on ping, so it'll just be worse for them. Obviously, it's possible, and I think for a lot of these players, it's something they should really consider, that it's actually easier to qualify for the major through America than it is through their own region, even if they have to play on ping. It's obviously going to be rubbish, and it's going to be rubbish for their sleep schedule, and potentially as well, if you're doing that, it means there's going to be less support in terms of translation and all these things. So it's a really hard one, but I think especially if you're a player like Spectra, or any of these players who have really good English, I mean, Opener probably falls into this category as well. But you've got someone like Spectra who has good English, or Chorong obviously has played on a mixed team. Faith is probably another good example of a player who's actually had a lot of success on a mixed team, or even a Western-dominated team. Kellen's played on a mixed team. Kalios as well, obviously at various times been on mixed teams. Sparkle as well, been on mixed teams. I don't have the exact read on how good everyone's English is, but there's lots of players, even like Birdring, Happy, Flora, all been on mixed teams. Edison. I mean, some of these people also actually, even if they've been on mixed teams, don't have a great reputation for knowing a lot of English, but it should be a serious consideration because it's way easier. Because look at this. Even just these 2 hypothetical teams and this team. I mean, maybe I'll put Birdring in. I feel like I'm going to get hate for the Ezham pick, but I'll put Birdring in. But even like these 3 teams, they can't all go to the major. So if you're one of the players not in this list, like especially if you're a flex support, like Izzyaki signing for Rock, you can make an argument that, is that not a good enough team for Izzyaki? I was like, look at his region. Fielder, Shoot, Vigilante. I mean, Mac is meant to be high talent, right? He was the guy who was signed to Florida, skewed. Twilight, Finn. Oh, absolutely sign that contract, Izzyaki. It makes so much sense for him. I mean, maybe Checkmate, you could argue, would actually be in these contention for these spots. But yeah, I think being an import player, even if it's a free import player in VNA, has to be a serious consideration for a lot of these Korean players. If they can handle the language and the time zone gap, if they can make that work, I think it's really viable. And I think especially if I'm a Spectra type player, a Faith type player, or a Happy even, or a Kellen, I'm really considering it. I'm really open to it. I mean, Burner actually played on GK Esports and Saudi E-League. I think I'd really consider it if this team doesn't work out. I think it's a really reasonable option to explore because the options in Korea are going to be so competitive. And I'm really, really interested to see what Runaway do. Do they just pick up some combination of these maybe top shelf chicken players, or do they go for some unknown chicken, some young chicken that no one's heard of, and do they try and build like an upcoming talent style roster? Or maybe they do a little bit of both, right? A couple of veterans alongside some upcoming talent could see it being really possible. Obviously, Runaway have also had quite big teams in the past as well, so they might even have quite an expansive squad. We'll have to wait and see. But let me know, again, as always, let me know in the comments what your super team would be. There's actually infinite choices, infinite combinations in Korea. So can you build a team like this team that I sort of theory crafted, I think actually can compete in some metas with Falcons? I don't know if it wins, but it's close. It makes it close. Can you build a team? Can you make something that's as well-rounded as Falcons? Probably not. But can you make a team out of everyone else that is as good as it can be and at least has the potential to go pretty far internationally as well? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Let me know what you think.